My daughter called me just her caregiver, in front of everyone. And I just smiled. At my daughter's graduation, she announced, "I have found my true family, a place where I belong and have my complete freedom." Then she pointed towards me and said, "That man was just my caregiver. As of today, he is no longer necessary in my life." I smiled and turned around. I remember the first time I held my daughter Grace in my arms, how tiny her fingers were, how she wrapped one of mine with her little hand as if it were her lifeline. I had just turned 25, barely a man, still learning how to manage the grocery budget and fix a leaking pipe. But the moment she looked at me with those bright, curious eyes, I stopped worrying about what I didn't know. Her mother had already decided she didn't want to be part of it. She left 2 weeks after Grace was born, murmuring something about not wanting to be tied down, about not wanting to rot in a small house with a crying baby and a man who didn't dream big enough. And maybe she was right. I didn't dream big, I just dreamed of stability. I wanted to give Grace a life that didn't feel like mere survival. And so I stayed. I was present. I packed lunches, I braided her hair, I read her bedtime stories until I lost my voice. I never called myself a hero, I was just her father. Raising her alone wasn't easy, and I'm not going to pretend I did it perfectly. I made mistakes. I missed some school meetings because I was working overtime at the factory. Sometimes I let frustration slip out in harsh words that I later regretted, but my love for her never wavered. I didn't have much, but I gave her everything I could. We didn't have trips to Disneyland or designer backpacks, but I made sure the lights were always on, the refrigerator full, and a roof over our heads no matter the storms. I remember the nights we sat together on the porch watching the fireflies, her little legs dangling from the step as she asked me about the stars. "Do you think Mom looks at the same sky?" she asked me once. She must have been about 9, and I didn't know what to answer. I just said, "She probably does, but I bet the sky looks prettier from here." She smiled, and for a moment, I believed it too. Over the years, the closeness we shared began to fade, subtle at first, like morning mist lifting from the grass. In high school, she became more critical, more distant. She made fun of my overalls, rolled her eyes at my blue-collar job, and started comparing our home to her friends. Girls with 2 parents, with houses that had open kitchens and granite countertops. I could feel her embarrassment every time I picked her up from school in my beat-up truck. She barely spoke in front of her peers, and if I dared to greet her or smile at her, she would just give me a quick nod before running inside. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, teenage pride, a search for identity. But then came the sarcastic comments, the growing silence, the way she started calling me David instead of Dad when she was angry. That hurt. Still, I told myself. Keep loving her, she'll come back. She was smart, brilliant, I always knew it. She had a mind that absorbed knowledge like a sponge and a tongue sharp enough to win any debate. I fostered every drop of that talent. I worked double shifts so she could attend private tutoring. I pulled strings at the local library so she could have access to college prep books. I skipped meals some nights just to be able to pay for her SAT camps and college application fees. I told her she could go wherever she wanted, be whoever she wanted, and deep down I knew she would make it. What I didn't know was that in becoming someone, she would feel the need to erase me completely. Graduation day arrived like a thief in the night. I blinked, and suddenly we were at the finish line. The house was quiet that morning. She barely looked at me as she put on her cap and gown, adjusting the tassel in the mirror with precision. I offered to take her picture, and she muttered, "Later." Even though we both knew that later would never come. I ironed my only good shirt, the blue one she had given me 2 Christmases ago, back when she still called me Daddy. I arrived early, found a seat near the front, camera in hand. I felt a surge of pride, the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would look for me in the crowd and smile, that she would remember. But what came next was something I could have never prepared for. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was filled by families with bouquets, balloons, and phones held high to capture their children's big moment. I sat in the third row, front left. She always said that was her good angle when we took pictures. I had arrived early enough to get a good spot, knowing she would see me if she looked. My fingers were clenched around the small digital camera I bought secondhand, the same one I used to record her ballet recital and her school plays when she was a child. My palms were sweating, even though the air conditioning was humming. It wasn't nerves, exactly. It was overwhelming anticipation, the memory of the years spent fighting against everything to get her there. I thought about all the nights I sat at the table helping her with essays I barely understood, Googling vocabulary just so I could keep up. I thought about how I used to cut the crusts off her bread because she said it made her feel elegant. I foolishly thought that maybe today would be the day she would come back to me, even if just for an instant. The ceremony proceeded as they usually do. Names, applause, more names, some scattered cheers. When they called hers, I stood up. I didn't care that no one else did. I didn't care that people looked at me. She crossed the stage with an elegance that made you believe she came from something, from someone important. She didn't look my way, she didn't acknowledge the man who raised her, fed her, protected her. But I clapped anyway. I clapped as if my hands could break through the distance and remind her that I was still there. I always was. Then came the speeches. They saved her for last. The MC introduced her as an exceptional student and a symbol of resilience, which made me let out a small, bitter laugh. Resilience. She didn't know what resilience meant. She didn't know what it was like to stand in line at a food bank at 6 a.m., hoping the cans would last the week. She didn't know what it was to patch your boots with duct tape because winter doesn't understand financial problems. But she walked up to the podium like a queen ascending her throne, chin high, wearing that same cold smile she'd had since she won the scholarship. I want to thank everyone who supported me, she began, her voice firm, confident. I have finally found my true family, people who truly understand me, who see my worth, and who offer me freedom. Freedom from judgment, from control, from limitations. She paused dramatically. The audience murmured, not quite understanding. Then she turned and pointed directly at me. Her voice louder now, sharp as venom. That man sitting there was just my caregiver, a replacement. He is no longer necessary in my life. The words landed like a slap. No, worse. You recover from a slap. This was surgical, calculated. Someone in the audience let out an, "Oh, my God." I sat still, frozen, my heart beating so hard I could barely hear the rest. Her voice kept talking about independence, about overcoming her roots, about breaking free. But none of it reached me. I just saw her calm, proud, relentless face as she erased me from her history as if I were a moldy chapter she was ashamed to claim. And still, I didn't react. I didn't run out, I didn't scream, I didn't even frown. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief or forgiveness. It was the kind of smile that appears when pain reaches a level so acute it transforms into something else, something mute, still, final. I stayed until the end of the speech. Not because I wanted to, but because leaving would have made it all about me, and I wasn't going to give her that power. I let her finish. I let the applause wash over her like an ovation she didn't deserve. Then I stood up slowly, the camera still in my hand, and walked out the side door before the procession began. I didn't look back. There was no need. Outside, the sun was too bright, burning against my skin like a punishment or perhaps a purification. I walked to my truck, put the key in the ignition with trembling fingers, and sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. I didn't cry. That would have felt like giving up on something I still believed in. No. I sat in silence, letting the engine hum beneath me like a heartbeat I was trying to sync with. I knew, without a doubt, that her words weren't born from courage, they were born from entitlement, from arrogance. She believed she didn't need me anymore because she thought she already had everything. A house, a car, her full master's tuition paid, a bright new life with no trace of the man who had raised her. What she didn't know, what she couldn't imagine, was that I was the one behind all of it. Yes. The scholarship that took her breath away, the life-changing opportunity she bragged about on all her social media and in every conversation. It was my doing. I created it. I had been planning it for years, working late, investing intelligently, partnering with an old college friend who was now on the university's board. I made it anonymous because I didn't want the credit, I just wanted to see her succeed. I told myself it wasn't about earning her love, but about giving her the kind of future I never had, even if I had to do it from the shadows. I spent the next 2 years working like a man possessed. I took every available shift, every overtime hour, every side job, even some I'm not proud of. I fixed cars in my garage on weekends, resold old lawnmowers for parts, I even took a job cleaning bathrooms at a local gym at night under a fake name, just to keep it secret. I saved every last penny. I stopped eating out. I wore the same boots until the soles fell apart. Meanwhile, I reconnected with an old college friend named Marcus. He had become a professor, then a dean, and finally joined the board of the university Grace dreamed of attending. I didn't tell him the whole story at first. I just asked questions, researched, learned what was needed to establish a legitimate scholarship program, the types of tax documents, legal structures, and endowments required. Marcus helped me put it all together, never asking why I was so interested in helping one deserving student. The day we signed the final documents, I remember looking at the folder as if it were a newborn. The Grace Initiative had become real, fully funded, legally structured, and designed to offer one student per year not just tuition, but also a furnished house near campus, a car, and a monthly stipend for living expenses. The only condition was that the recipient maintain good standing and demonstrate personal and academic growth. I made it foolproof, but flexible enough that the board could revoke it if necessary if the student wasted the opportunity or failed to uphold the values upon which we had built it. I asked Marcus to keep my name off everything. No press, no dedications, I told him. If she ever finds out, it can't come from a headline. He nodded, curious but respectful. I think he just thought I was some sentimental philanthropist trying to atone for something. When Grace got the call, she screamed so loud I thought someone had died. She ran through the house like a kid on Christmas morning, waving the letter in my face. "Full ride," she said, her eyes shining. "A house, a car, I even get money for food, Dad." And for a brief second, she was the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders again. But then came the change. A week later, she started talking differently, carrying herself like someone who had been born into the life she was just entering. She started calling herself self-made, comparing our house to the new one, criticizing our neighborhood. She even let the word ghetto slip once, and I almost dropped the plate I was washing. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to say, "Do you know who made this possible? Do you have any idea how many nights I bled for this?" But I didn't. I swallowed it. I thought maybe it was her way of adjusting. Maybe she needed to shed her old skin before she could grow into something new. Then came graduation. Her betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been building for months. But nothing prepared me for the coldness in her voice. The pride in her eyes as she cut me down in front of hundreds of people, as if I were nothing more than a live-in babysitter. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and her scholarship file in the other, wondering if I had failed as a father or if I had succeeded too well. I thought about letting it go, about walking away quietly, letting her keep what she had, even if it meant erasing me. But something inside me broke. Not with rage, but with clarity. If she could stand in front of a crowd and publicly disown me, then she had already disqualified herself from everything I had given her. Not because I needed gratitude, but because character matters, and hers had just failed the test. So I made the call. Marcus was stunned when I told him the truth. I explained everything. The real reason I had created the fund, the fact that Grace was my daughter, and what had happened at the graduation. He was silent for a long time. "Do you want to revoke it?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," I replied, my voice firm. She violated the core values. She repudiated the very foundation of her story. That scholarship isn't just about money, it's about honor, and she just threw it away. We moved quickly. The board convened an emergency session the next morning. They had the legal grounds. The decision was unanimous. Grace received the email notification that same afternoon, a request to meet with the scholarship office for an urgent administrative clarification. She probably thought it was a paperwork issue or maybe an extension of benefits. She didn't know that the moment she walked into that office, everything would start to unravel. And this time, I wouldn't be hiding behind the curtain. She walked into the office wearing her confidence like a freshly pressed cloak. Black slacks, white blouse, a designer bag hanging from her shoulder like a medal of honor. She walked like someone convinced the world owed her more. Chin high, lips forming that slight smile I used to mistake for pride. She didn't see me at first. I was sitting at the far end of the conference room, behind a frosted glass panel that only partially revealed my silhouette. I watched her through the glass as she greeted the receptionist with a confident, arrogant, "I'm here for my meeting." She had no idea she was walking straight into the reckoning she herself had caused. I leaned back in my chair, controlling my breathing, reminding myself not to feel sorry for her. She made this decision. She walked onto that stage, pointed her finger at me, and erased me in front of the entire world. When the assistant showed her in and the door closed behind her, the room became a vacuum. She saw me and froze. Her smile cracked, faltered, and then disappeared completely. "Dad?" she asked, her voice weak, almost childish for the first time in months. But I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I just pointed to the seat across from me and said, "You're here for the scholarship meeting, right? Let's begin." She didn't sit right away. She stood there, trapped between indignation and confusion, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting a camera crew to jump out yelling, "Gotcha." Finally, she sat, stiff and tense, gripping the armrests like a lifeline. "I don't understand," she said, her voice lower now. "Why are you here?" I slid the folder across the table. Inside was the termination letter, signed by the board, with all the legal justifications highlighted. I let her read the whole thing. I watched her eyes move across the page, her face draining of color with every line. Her mouth fell open slightly, disbelief spreading across her face like a storm cloud. "What is this?" she asked, blinking fast. "This can't be right. There must be some mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. My grades are perfect. I haven't broken any rules." I nodded slowly. "Academically, yes. You're impeccable. But this scholarship wasn't just about grades. It was about integrity. About community. About respect for your roots. And last week, during your graduation speech, you disqualified yourself from every single one of those values." Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "You're ending my scholarship. Because of a speech?" "No," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "Because of what that speech revealed. You didn't just distance yourself from me, you publicly and cruelly erased me. You told the world I was nothing but a substitute in your story, nothing more than a caregiver who had outlived his usefulness. That kind of betrayal isn't just personal. It's a profound failure of character. And this scholarship was built on character." Then I leaned forward slowly, letting the weight of my next words land like bricks. "Grace, I created this scholarship. Every dollar, every resource, every benefit. You owe to me. And I kept my name off it because I wanted you to succeed on your own terms. I wanted to give you something without asking for recognition. But what you did. You didn't just spit in my face. You spat in the face of everything this opportunity stood for. The silence that followed was deafening. She sagged back in her chair, her eyes wide, lips trembling. "You're lying," she whispered. But it wasn't conviction, it was panic. I said nothing. I just slid a second folder across the table. This one contained documents, email exchanges, foundation signatures, and my name on every funding file. She opened it with shaky hands. Her fingers trembled as she turned each page, her breathing sharp and audible. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes glassy. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why would you take it all away?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to feel the weight of it. I wanted her to taste what abandonment felt like. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted her to understand the depth of what she had done. "Because you asked for it," I said. "You finally made your choice. You said you no longer needed me in your life. I'm just giving you what you wanted." Then came the pleading. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, Dad, don't do this. I didn't mean it." I got caught up in the moment. I wanted to impress people, to sound brave and independent. I didn't know. If I had known, you have to believe me. I was stupid, okay? I was arrogant, but I didn't mean to hurt you like this. Her words came out like broken glass, each one cutting the silence. She leaned across the table, palms flat, eyes searching mine. "You raised me. You love me. You've always loved me. Don't punish me like this, please. I'll fix it." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. Part of meth part that once read her bedtime stories and kissed her scraped knees wanted to hold her and tell her it was okay. But that part of me had been slowly dying for years, and her speech was the final blow. "You didn't just hurt me," I said quietly. "You used me. You climbed on my back to get to the top and then kicked me away like I was something rotten. And now that you're falling, you remember I exist. That's not love. That's convenience." I stood up, gathering the folders and pushing my chair back with steady hands. "You're not being punished. You're being held accountable. There's a difference." She tried one last time, standing up and grabbing my arm not forcefully, but desperately. "Dad, don't go. Please, you can't just walk away from me." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve and carefully unhooked her fingers. "I already did," I said. And I meant it. I walked out of that room feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I had taken something from her, but because I had finally given something back to myself. My worth. My peace. My boundary. Outside, the sky was overcast, but the air felt clean. I got in my truck, sat for a moment, and then let out a soft, bitter laugh. How strange. I thought love could stretch so far and still break. That you could give someone everything, your sweat, your savings, your soul, and still, that person could look at you like a footnote. But I wasn't a footnote anymore. Not anymore. I had rewritten the ending. And I didn't even use a single word. In the days that followed, the silence was louder than her speech. I didn't hear from her right away. I didn't expect to. I imagined her walking through that fancy house, knowing now that she was living on borrowed time, packing boxes without knowing where to take them. Staring at the car keys on the counter, wondering when they would be snatched from her hands. There's a kind of silence that only follows a public disintegration. The kind where everyone is afraid to ask, but too curious to look away. I knew people were talking, her professors, her friends, the scholarship office staff who heard her crying in that room. And I knew her version of the story wouldn't get very far, because for once, the evidence wasn't on her side. 2 days later, it started with a text message. Just 2 words. "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a full minute before locking the phone and setting it face down on the table. She didn't deserve access to me anymore. That might sound cold, and maybe it was. But some betrayals don't deserve an open door. Some require a locked gate and silence behind it. And mine. Mine was fortified by 22 years of sacrifice that she erased in 22 seconds. It continued with more, longer messages. Paragraphs that ranged from regret to manipulation. One said, "I didn't mean what I said." Another, "You raised me better than this." And then, more desperate, "Please, just let me explain." I read every one, but I didn't reply. She needed to feel the weight of her words, the same way I had to feel the weight of her rejection. Finally, she came to the house. I heard the knock just after sunset. I was sitting in my armchair, reading an old book I could never seem to finish, the TV murmuring in the background like a voice I didn't need. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, hair messy, no makeup, sweatshirt clutched tight like armor, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. And that scared me more than anything. "Dad," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. I didn't open the door any wider. I just leaned against the frame and looked at her the way a stranger would, with curiosity, but no attachment. "Talking is what got us here," I said. "I'm not sure there's anything left to say." Her eyes filled with tears. "You won't even let me try?" I shrugged. "You already made your announcement, Grace. You called me a caregiver. I'm just doing my job now. Making sure you take care of yourself." And I closed the door. She left a voicemail that night. I didn't listen to all of it. Her voice broke halfway through. She sounded like someone who finally understood that the consequences weren't temporary. But I couldn't give in. No. Every parent has a limit, and mine had been crossed, erased, and stomped on in public. I owed this to myself. Not out of spite, but out of preservation. The next week, I heard from Marcus. He said she had contacted the university board to appeal the decision. She claimed emotional distress, misunderstanding, manipulation. But the vote had already been recorded. The board held firm. "We saw the video, David," Marcus told me over the phone. "There's no way she didn't know what she was saying. It wasn't a mistake, it was a declaration." I thanked him for holding the line and hung up, feeling relief and grief pressing on my chest like two twin weights. Then the rumors started. Someone at the university leaked the revocation with just enough detail to get tongues wagging. Soon, the whispers turned into talk. Her inner circle began to shrink. The same girls who had toasted her scholarship now avoided eye contact with her on campus. Her roommate moved out. Her professors started treating her like a walking cautionary tale. Grace had spent months building a new identity, scholar, star, independent woman, and now it was crumbling, piece by piece. And still, I didn't reach out. I watched from a distance, not because I enjoyed it, but because I needed to. I needed her to experience the space she herself had insisted on creating. This wasn't punishment, it was the price of clarity. Then Elle showed up. Elle was my neighbor's son, 24, ex-military, back from an injury overseas. He used to cut my lawn as a teenager, and we'd kept in touch. One afternoon, while he was helping me fix a gutter, he mentioned he'd seen Grace on campus. "She looked rough, man," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow. I tried to say hi, she barely looked up. "I think she's really going through it." I didn't answer right away. I just kept hammering the bracket into the siding as if I hadn't heard him. But he pressed on. "I'm not saying you should forgive her," he added carefully. "But I don't know if she really understood the line she crossed. You were always her anchor, and now she's in freefall." I thought about that for a long time. After he left, I went into the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept all her old drawings. The one on top was from when she was 7. A picture of her and me under a big sun. Stick figures with smiles, holding hands. In her handwriting, it said, "Me and my hero." I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything in my head. The good, the bad, the breaking point. I could have prevented this. I pushed too hard. I should have seen it coming. But no matter how many angles I analyzed it from, I always came back to the same truth. Love doesn't guarantee loyalty. And sometimes the people you give the most to are the ones who feel the most entitled to whatever you have left. That's what hurt the most. Not the public humiliation, not even the loss of the scholarship. It was the realization that my daughter believed she could cut me out of her life but keep the parts of me that suited her, the money, the security, the legacy, without honoring the man behind it all. So I held firm. And with every day, the silence between us grew heavier. Not empty, but full of unsaid words, overdue apologies, and the echoes of a relationship broken beyond repair. And still, a part of me kept watching. Not because I wanted to see her fail, but because I hoped, deep down, quietly, that one day she would rise up without forgetting where she came from. But that climb. That was hers now. I had already given her the launch pad. What she did next was entirely up to her. 3 months passed. The seasons changed. The leaves outside my window went from green to gold, then to a brittle brown, as if time wanted to remind me that nothing stays full forever. The air had that first bite of winter, and I found myself spending more evenings by the fireplace with cups of black coffee instead of whiskey, trying to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander back to her. But it always did. Every day, I'd think of something small. Her favorite childhood cereal that I still caught myself buying out of habit. The old hooded sweatshirt she used to steal from my closet. The half-painted art project still buried in the garage under a tarp. These memories weren't sentimental anymore, they were minefields. I'd step on one, and the rest of the day would fall apart into fragments. People think that once you make a hard decision, especially one as final as cutting off your own child, it gets easier over time. That's a lie. It doesn't get easier. It gets quieter. The ache dulls, sure, but it never disappears. You just learn to carry it differently. You rearrange your routines. You teach yourself not to hope. When the phone rings, you stop leaping for it. And when the weight returns as it does in the slow moments, folding laundry, mending the fence, boiling water, you nod to it, like an old enemy that never fully left, and you keep going anyway. That's what I had to do. Grace had made her choice. So had I. But closure. That part was still in progress. Then, one Saturday morning in December, she came back. I was raking leaves in the front yard, bundled in my flannel jacket, headphones on, listening to an old blues record. I saw her before she saw me. She parked across the street. A different car this time, older, dented, the kind you own when the rug's been pulled out from under you and there's no safety net left. She got out of the car slowly. No makeup this time, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, eyes heavy with something I couldn't immediately read. Regret. Exhaustion. Maybe both. I didn't pause the music. I just kept raking, letting her cross the distance. When she reached the edge of the lawn, she stopped and waited. I finished one last pull of the rake before taking my headphones off. "Hi, Dad," she said. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. Really looked at her. She was thinner, worn down. The shine was gone, but in its place was something else. Something realer, less manufactured. She shifted her feet nervously. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I know I messed up. I know what I did at graduation was unforgivable, maybe. But I've had time to think. To see it from the outside. I came to apologize. Not for the scholarship, not for the money. For you. For what I said. For how I made you feel." She looked down at her hands. "You didn't deserve that. You gave me everything, and I spat in your face. I see that now." The wind picked up, swirling the leaves between us, as if it didn't want the moment to settle. I leaned on the rake, my heart hammering, unsure if what I felt was anger or sadness. Why now? I asked. Why today? She shrugged slowly. Because I realized the only freedom I ever had came from you. I thought cutting you off would make me feel independent, but it just left me empty. And I know I can't undo what I said, but I needed to face you. Not to ask for a second chance. Just to be honest. I nodded slowly. And what does honesty look like now? I asked. She bit her lip. It looks like me saying I was wrong. It looks like admitting I was ashamed. Not of you, but of where I came from. And how stupid that was. I thought success meant shedding the past. I didn't realize the past was the only reason I even got close to success. You carried me when no one else did. You deserved more than a footnote in my life. Her voice cracked on that last sentence. She took a step closer, but not too close. I wanted to tell you that. In person. For a long moment, we stood in silence. Not an awkward silence, but a full one. I thought about reaching out, about pulling her into a hug. But I didn't. Not because I didn't love her, but because love doesn't mean backing down. Grace, I said, my voice steady. Thank you for saying it. I needed to hear it. But that doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. She nodded. I know. I continued. Forgiving isn't the same as forgetting. And trust. Trust takes longer. Her eyes glistened, but she nodded again. I'll earn it. If you let me. I didn't answer. I just looked up at the sky. I let the moment breathe. Take care of yourself, I said after a silence. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she held back. She turned and walked back to her car, her hands shaking slightly as she opened the door. She didn't cry, at least not that I could see. She just nodded one more time before driving away into the dim morning light, her silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror. I stood there for a long time after she left, the rake in my hand, the cold biting at my skin. And then, for the first time in months, I exhaled. Not with relief, not with regret, but with clarity. Some people think cutting ties with family is cruel. But the cruelty is pretending everything is okay when it's not. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for them, and for yourself, is to step away from the damage and leave the door just open enough for growth to get in, but not so open that history can repeat itself. She might never earn her way back. Or maybe she will. But I'm no longer the caregiver who can be discarded. I'm the father who finally stood up for himself. Sometimes the deepest betrayal comes from the people you raised with your own two hands. But love without respect is a wound that never heals.